So in this video, I'll be discussing some of the insights that I learned from my mushroom experiments in regards to trying to resolve sensory issues that I had struggled with for my whole life. I still occasionally struggle with it. Unfortunately, none of my experiences or experiments led to a permanent solution, but I did find out quite a bit about different pathways. So there's a serotonin receptor called 5-HT2A, and this receptor is also kind of the receptor that controls serotonin levels in the brain and the body. So serotonin affects not only the brain, but also affects the body very strongly in so many different ways. It's actually crazy. Once you start looking into how does serotonin affect the body, you will get so many answers. And so I was trying to figure out, how come when I was manic and how come when I was tripping with mushrooms, how come all my sensory issues vanished? And I was trying to figure it out. So I start cross-referencing things and I start studying, okay, what's the underlying mechanism behind psilocybin? Well, it triggers a receptor called 5-HT2A receptors. So then it got me thinking, well, maybe I can trigger that same receptor, but in a more risk-free way. So I'll lead you down my mind map rabbit hole in terms of sensory issues and healing concepts. So first I wrote, most likely the overlap between these two is the thalamus. The overlap between psilocybin taking away sensory issues and mania taking away sensory issues. And then I realized, turns out serotonin levels directly cause sensory gating. So if you have low sensory gating acts exactly as it sounds. It controls like a gate for how easily the part of the brain called the thalamus can filter out sensory information. So if you don't have enough gating, that means you're going to get a lot more sensory information that you can't filter out. It is, at its core, in this example, a filtration issue. So then after doing that cross-referencing, I said, okay, hypothesis, my thalamus probably has reduced serotonin levels resulting in sensory issues. Since I had already experienced many undesirable side effects from psilocybin in different ways that you can hear from my previous video, I wanted to find something that would be able to directly target those serotonin levels without a downside, which then led me to experiment with 5-HTP. So 5-HTP can fix many serotonin-related issues. It can improve depression. It can improve PMDD, which is like a significantly worse version of PMS. And 5-HTP is actually a precursor to serotonin. And that was why I tried it initially, suspecting that it would help. And then it did. As soon as I tried 5-HTP, I had no anxiety at all anymore, was better able to handle stress in my life, had the best sleep in my life for that week, and sensory issues vanished. And I was amazed. I was flabbergasted. So then I was questioning, okay, well, if this works so well, is there a step below it? Is there something that's even more risk-free? Because after a certain amount of pain, you don't want to try anything that's super risky anymore. Like 2023. Enough said there. So then I discovered this fantastic amino acid called L-Tryptophan. And so L-Tryptophan actually gets converted to different things. One of those things happens to be 5-HTP, which is a precursor to serotonin. And then serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. And melatonin is the neurotransmitter which allows you to sleep very well at night, not wake up, get a good night's sleep, and be able to function the next day with better sleep. So then, after giving it 2 weeks break because I didn't want to influence things, and I definitely didn't want to take them together because I wanted an isolated, controlled experiment. Then I took L-Tryptophan And the concept was, okay, if I take L-tryptophan and it doesn't help me with serotonin production, then I know that the bottleneck is between the conversion of L-tryptophan and 5-HTP, which is that serotonin precursor. On the other hand, if it works, then I have a totally new angle to explore. And lo and behold, it worked. It was amazing. It was a night and day difference. As soon as I started taking L-tryptophan, whenever I'm in the follicle phase, all my sensory issues are gone. And I mean, I can now wear jeans every single day to work without wanting to cry. Before that, jeans were extremely triggering. It was the worst imaginable texture ever. Denim, it was like a stress response. I spent so much of my life trying to avoid jeans in any possible way because it's just such a terrible texture. Even just thinking about it, I hate it. Even though now I can wear it, it's still retroactively, I can feel that triggering sensation from it, thinking about it. And so tryptophan worked. Tryptophan actually completely removed all those symptoms when I was in the follicle phase. In the luteal phase, it helped tremendously, but not as intensely. I would say in follicle phase, it reduced about 80% or 90% of sensory issues. And then the luteal phase, about 70% until leading up to the period where all neurotransmitters drop. And that's usually now when sensory issues come back full force, unfortunately. But that's still only 2 days of really bad sensory issues out of every 33, approximately, which is a hell of a lot better than having sensory issues every day for your entire life and not being able to do anything about it. So then, as tryptophan started working and totally preventing, really, that's what it was, preventing sensory issues, I wanted to understand the entire mechanism. Why is tryptophan working? What is it doing that is helping me so much? So I started studying it. I found out that basically this rate-limited amino acid, L-tryptophan, rate-limited, by the way, means your body is only going to use the amount that it needs to produce the exact amount that it needs. And the reason I was interested in a rate-limited approach was because I didn't want there to be these cycles of back and forth serotonin fluctuations that had caused me so many issues in the past. I wanted something that was stable. I wanted something that would be optimized for my body instead of guessing, trying to shoot darts in the dark, which is certainly how it felt when I got started with this, because I didn't have a doctor teaching me any of this. That's a different video and a different question. But anyway, tryptophan has 3 pathways that it goes through in the human body. One of these pathways is a pathway called the kynurenine pathway, and that is about where 90 to 95% of tryptophan goes. It goes into this pathway, and there's a lot of research that suggests that autistic people have an increased tryptophan to kynurenine pathway production. So autistic minds and bodies are going to be taking more of that tryptophan away from the serotonin pathway. So yeah, we have 3 pathways: kynurenine pathway, TPH pathway, which is tryptophan hydroxylase pathway, and tryptamine. So I'm going to say that one more time. Kynurenine, the serotonin pathway, tryptamine. And so autistic people tend to have an increased kynurenine pathway from some studies that were done. And by the way, take everything I'm saying here with a grain of salt, because the truth is that there's not enough research about autism in general. There's also not enough fair research, which is a totally different problem. And there's a lot of gaps. So this is just what I've synthesized based on my experiences and what I've found through PubMed and reading about probably 1,000 or 2,000 different PubMed articles. So I started thinking, okay, maybe the autistic body and brain requires more tryptophan as a whole in order for the kynurenine pathway's needs to be completely met and to have enough remaining for serotonin. So you can kind of think of it like a pool of resources. If all of your resources are going down one pathway, they are not going down the other pathways. So if you're autistic and you have serotonin issues, this is one possibility of how serotonin-related comorbidities could intersect with autism. Because for whatever reason, more of that tryptophan gets pulled into the kynurenine pathways, leaving less for serotonin. So kynurenine pathway is still neuroprotective. It does boost energy with creating something called NAD+. However, it could also, on the downside, create something called quinolic acid, which is a neurotoxin, basically. It's kind of a way of the body's garbage collection system, or the brain's garbage collection in a way. It's trying to flush out toxins. And I'm probably oversimplifying this because I don't know everything on this topic, just trying to give a high-level breakdown. So, pathway number 2 is the serotonin pathway, which I will come right back to. And then pathway number 3, I was not expecting this one. It's tryptamine. So what is tryptamine? Well, if you've ever heard of DMT, dimethyltryptamine, that's the same tryptamine. Yeah, I was surprised too. So you're telling me that this basic amino acid, which can be found in foods like nuts, ties into DMT? Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. How are people not constantly hallucinating? It's a totally different question. But the point is that if any of these pathways it takes up more tryptophan, then it leaves less tryptophan for the other pathways. As someone who has experienced hallucinations independently of drugs before, I have been wondering for the longest time, how is that even possible? It's possible through the tryptamine pathways. So if your L-Tryptophan gets processed by the mind or brain via tryptamine pathway, well, then the DMT pathway happens, and it can also increase something called INMT, which can then result in hallucinations and can decrease serotonin because, again, more of that crucial amino acid resource is getting pulled into the tryptamine pathway. So if you're hallucinating like crazy, you're probably completely demolishing your tryptophan levels. So that's important to address. Or if you are someone who has more tryptophan requirements for your kynurenine pathway, well, that pathway could be taking away from the rest of these pathways, aka the serotonin pathway that everyone likes. So, pathway number 2 I'd like to discuss. Pathway number 2, or the serotonin pathway, or tryptophan hydroxylase, is actually where L-tryptophan gets converted into HTP, and then HTP gets converted into serotonin, and pretty much everything in your life requires serotonin being balanced enough for you to feel calm, for you to not feel overwhelmed, for you to feel even oxytocin relies on serotonin to quite a large extent. So in order for you to feel calm, for you to sleep well, for you to feel connected with others, for you to feel connected in nature, for you to feel peaceful, content, those kinds of feelings, that's all serotonin. So then I wanted to take it one step further, and I was asking, if tryptophan is helping me so much, then that must mean that it's helping me by increasing serotonin from possibly my original hypothesis that maybe for me, my autistic brain probably gets less serotonin from or within the thalamus, which is why it was so impossibly difficult for me to filter out sensory overload or certain sensory sensations or sounds. I kind of figured that it was all tied to serotonin, and then the effects of L-tryptophan then confirmed that assumption. Delightfully, I am so glad to finally have a solution to my problems. It is what I was waiting for and searching for so long, and I feel like discovering that gave me the ability to kind of rest for a while, to stop obsessively searching out new knowledge to try to fix things. Because finally I was getting more serotonin, and was actually feeling pretty content and happy. Combine that with therapy. L-tryptophan plus therapy is such a good combo because you're giving your brain the raw material that it needs to learn new, helpful beliefs about yourself. And fun fact, that whole pathway is the same pathway that shrooms trigger. So more than likely, if you feel a specific body effect from shrooms, L-tryptophan will probably reliably reproduce it from a similar serotogenic effect. Sorry for the mispronunciations. This is complicated. And so I also was trying to understand, are there other conditions that shift tryptophan away from the serotonin pathway? And it turns out there are. Nearly every autoimmune condition almost on the planet diverts tryptophan away from the serotonin pathways and into the other pathways like the kynurenine pathway. What is an example of something that forces tryptophan into that pathway number 3, aka the kynurenine pathway, not the serotonin? What is diverting these resources away from the crucial neurotransmitter that helps me in every single aspect of my life? One of those things, endometriosis. Because endometriosis activates a bunch of mast cells, which then can cause mast cell overactivation, which then can cause high histamine and inflammation in the body or in the mind. Inflammation anywhere in your entire body, let's include the mind in this, can divert tryptophan away from serotonin. So if you deal with inflammation, you probably have a higher need for tryptophan because your body is trying to heal itself from that inflammation, is then directing all of that tryptophan amino acid to go into the kynurenine pathways for body healing. So autoimmune conditions, inflammatory conditions, chronic pain conditions, there's so many different conditions which can really mess up serotonin as a direct result of this. And in my case, my sensory issues at its core were from serotonin imbalance. Because serotonin was too low in the thalamus, it made it impossible for me to filter out sensory anything, whether that was noises, lights, sounds, textures, everything. It was all from serotonin. Serotonin levels were way too low to be able to support that filtering. So then as soon as I started supplementing with amino acids with L-tryptophan, finally my brain and body got what it needed to be able to effectively trigger that 5-HT2A pathway again in the exact way that I needed to create a positive reinforcement loop that I've been living ever since. It's been beautiful how stabilizing it was for me. It was a little destabilizing the first day or so. And by the way, if you're on SSRIs or anything that impacts serotonin, do not take L-tryptophan, the amino acid, with SSRIs. Do not take L-tryptophan with psychedelics because it's the same pathway. You don't want to overwhelm that serotonin pathway. If you overwhelm the 5-HT2A pathway, you will regret it. You want it to be balanced. You want it to be rate limited so that your body can do what it does without problems, ideally. And so then I really started thinking about it. I was like, okay, well, if L-tryptophan is really the solution to this problem, well, what caused that in the first place? And I realized it was a sensory issue negative loop. Why did I not consume enough L-tryptophan in my diet? Because the foods that have L-tryptophan in it were terrible textures or bad textures or textures I couldn't stand, I couldn't handle because of sensory issues. So sensory issues were directly preventing me from naturally consuming more L-tryptophan, which would have resolved my sensory issues. You can see how that would be a toxic loop of pain and suffering. So what is the takeaway all of this? Well, the takeaway is that if you suspect that you have serotonin issues and you're not on SSRIs and you're not microdosing psychedelics or doing anything that impacts serotonin, but you're still looking for solutions to something that might benefit you for sensory issues, look into L-Tryptophan. I don't get paid from saying this, and I'm also not going to tell you any brands that I recommend for that reason. L-Tryptophan is probably one of the most underrated compounds I've ever discovered in my life, because it was able to take me from I can't wear anything because all of this clothing is way too painful to wow, now I can actually kind of select what I wear based on how I want to look. It was life-changing. It freed me from so much sensory pain that I had internalized as normal my entire life. I had internalized it as everyone just has to suffer through life in this regard. No, most people are not suffering through life in their sensory world. Most people are actually in the comfort zone. The comfort zone is not a metaphor. Like, their nervous systems are calm from the lights, from their clothing. There's nothing that they're not constantly on edge from being triggered from all this external, unfiltered information. So give it a try. If you're looking for a solution for sensory issues, see if L-Tryptophan works. I take 1,000 milligrams every night before bed. I recommend taking it before bed because at night, serotonin starts increasing, and then as soon as you go to bed, or even slightly before you go to bed, serotonin starts to convert into melatonin. And there's also a lot of proven research that suggests that autistic people have less melatonin. So maybe all my sensory gating fixes have happened as a result of increased melatonin being produced naturally by my body and better sleep. That's also a very compelling possibility. But if you're suffering out there with sensory issues, know that that's not something you have to accept as your fate for the rest of your life. Also know that you're not alone in that, and it might be worth a try to see if amino acids like tryptophan can help you out. And then looking at what contains tryptophan naturally, you'll keep finding it's all in protein. Protein is so crucial in so many ways with amino acids in general, and I would highly encourage anyone who is looking to improve different symptoms to look at how much protein you're eating per day. Make sure you're getting enough tyrosine, tryptophan. Make sure you're getting enough amino acids across the board. Because without the raw materials for your brain to do what it needs to do, it's going to create gaps, dopamine gaps, serotonin gaps, oxytocin gaps. It's going to create these gaps, and then you might internalize that as being off or feeling bad or being depressed. You might internalize all of this as part of your identity when really it's a neurotransmitter fluctuation that is easily solvable. So I'm doing what I wish someone had done for me. Learn about tryptophan, learn about how it affects these different pathways, and recognize that the body is a self-sustaining system that is very delicate. So please don't take huge risks. Be careful with 5-HTP because 5-HTP is not rate limited, but tryptophan is. Anything that's not rate limited, you're going to have a much higher risk associated with it because you could push your brain into unhealthy serotonin levels, which can then really screw up a lot of things. So give it a try. If you're looking for solutions, try L-Tryptophan or L-Tyrosine if you're dealing with dopamine challenges, or amino acids in general. I'm not saying supplement. You could probably get all this from diet if you really like certain foods. Or maybe it's not even a problem for you because you already eat enough of those foods. That's also possible. But I hope that this information about tryptophan and its 3 different pathways helps you to make more informed decisions about your own neurochemistry.